Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Life cycles. These are particular things, and everything goes in a particular cycle, and we need to find out a way that we can restore a balance to our emotional health, as well as tensions between the sexes, as well as healing our fractured culture by honoring the divine feminine consciousness and re-embracing these natural cycles, which also include our innate need for rest and retreat. Today we're going to discover an ancient tradition around blood and sacred retreat. For example, women during menstruation and of men during vision quest offered a cleansing process for the body, mind, and spirit, alone time to clear suppressed emotions and awaken our innate creativity and sensitivity while reattuning us with the deeper rhythms of the body and nature. We're going to learn how we can restore our biological cycles to heal ourselves, our culture, and our planet, as we are joined today with someone who is the founder of the Pleiadian Earth Energy Astrology. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Pia Orlean. Pia, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Good morning, Daniel. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, let's talk about what the premise of this work is. It's kind of unique, I guess. I know I said quite a mouthful, especially for a lot of our listeners out there who might be scratching their head going, okay, now, really, what was he just talking about here?
Well, you did summarize the book quite eloquently, and I appreciate your in-depth understanding of what it's all about. I wrote the book because I want everyone on this planet who's interested in returning to balance to understand specific ways that we can participate in restoring more harmony between our relationships, us and each other, between us and the earth, all things that are out of disharmony. We have become a very technically based culture. We base everything on technological and artificial rhythms. Even scheduling appointments around the Gregorian calendar, which is a 12-month cycle, is out of harmony with the Earth's natural cycle, which is more based on energies that are in harmony with the moon. So if we want to recover a sense of harmony and balance within ourselves, we need to find some specific guidelines we can use about how to do it. And I wrote this book to help do that.
Now, we could state more about technology and that being out of balance, because what I've noticed a lot going on, especially over the last 5 years, is there seems to be a lot of language surrounding I suppose, putting up on the pedestal the observation of science. It seems everything now is getting the stamp of science approval, saying this is science-based, this is recognized by science. You were talking about technology earlier, and you think to yourself, yeah, but, what about religion and spirituality? What happened there? Are we kind of pushing that aside because technology gives us such immediate proof and validation about our awareness of what's going on?
I think humans like to be validated in their belief system, whatever that belief system might be. That's a natural thing to want to feel secure that what we think and what we believe is real. And because science is focused upon validity and proving things, that has been touted as the ultimate way to be able to assume we are making sense out of our lives and out of our world. But it completely discounts spiritual experience. It completely discounts biological experience. It completely discounts anything except what's in the mind, because science is based on mental concepts and what can be proven through mental proofs. It doesn't allow what we know in our bodies. It doesn't allow what we experience spiritually or what other forms of guidance might have taught us along our path.
Now, as I was talking about in the introduction about the divine feminine, now people would kind of think to themselves, well, that sounds great for women, but it's also part of manhood as well. Talk about what that is exactly.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful question. My perspective on the divine feminine is that each human being has a divine masculine and a divine feminine within them. And we are androgynous beings who are expressed either as a male or as a female. But we actually hold within us both masculine qualities that are beautiful and wonderful and feminine qualities that are beautiful and wonderful. But our culture has focused primarily upon the masculine That's the need for progress, the need to line things up and do them linearly, the need to get things done. Whereas the feminine is more the aspect of being able to do things in waves that fit, flow, and harmony organically. The feminine, the divine feminine, has to do with nurturance, it has to do with harmony, it has to do with supporting one another, whereas the masculine paradigm has been tipped so badly out of balance that now the masculine often is around competition, around making ourselves known to be who we are without considering anybody else. It's become out of balance, so the masculine is no longer representing itself as divine. And because of that, the feminine is no longer representing itself as divine either. Both of these gender representations are struggling desperately to find balance. And that's why we have such discord and so much divorce rates, in my opinion, because we're totally out of balance between our genders. Neither of us accepting that we hold masculine within the feminine and feminine within the masculine.
Now, let's talk about how ignoring our natural cycles can contribute to ill health and lack of connection, as well as, the idea that we always seem to be at war.
Thank you. That's a great question also. If we ignore our natural cycles, we stay in a mode of stress all the time, 24/7, because we're constantly focused on what comes next. Or we may look back and go, what's just happened and what do I need to do about it when it's already passed? When you stay in harmony with the natural cycles, you're focused on what is needed right now in the present moment. We're not doing that as a culture. What we're doing is focused on linearity and progress progress keeps us pushing. With that focus on linear progress all the time, there's no space to allow contemplation. There's no place to consider another's viewpoint. There's no place to integrate other perspectives. We simply focus and concentrate on what we believe to be true. That type of rigid mindset leads people to argue because they want to hold on to, this is my belief and I know it's right. And that leads into aspects that can contribute to war. And it can be war between a couple, it can be war between friends, or it can be war between nations. But if we don't slow down and allow a pause naturally to be able to listen and to be able to take in what the other side is saying, there can be no harmony.
Now, I was curious about the research where you evaluated the spiritual treatment of women's cycles. Tell us how you did your research and what you discovered.
Thank you. It was a triangulated research, meaning I investigated from three different aspects. I had a group of women that I asked to sleep separately from their partners for a period of time, with a trial base on either side of that period of time where they would sleep with their partners as usual. The prerequisites had to be that each person had permission from their partner to support in this research because we didn't want to cause more discord. And they had to have a place that they could consider their sacred space where they could withdraw to retreat during the time they were sleeping separately. The time for sleeping separately was based upon their menstrual cycle. When they began to bleed, they moved into their sacred space away from the marital bed. And what I had them do was to keep a journal, answer a questionnaire, and then I interviewed them. So I had three different aspects and different ways of investigating their experience. What I was investigating for was to find out if this ancient practice that was instigated by women for women a long time ago, I was investigating to see what the effects of that practice would be. And I was looking specifically at four areas. Would it increase creativity? Would it increase relationship harmony? Would it increase dreams and intuition? Would it increase spiritual impact? So I was looking at those areas, and as I did my research, which was a 7-month total research project, I found what is known as statistically significant results. That means that the positive results and answers that I got to all these questions could not be attributed to chance. So I actually have a scientific explanation for something that is expressed as wisdom of the body.
I was thinking as you were talking about all this, when it came to women's cycles, it seemed to be something that became shameful maybe even taboo, perhaps. Now, how do we lose the value of recognizing the power of women's cycles?
I think that happened when originally men noticed that when women could bring forth life, and some of the older cultures the men were jealous of that because they wanted to bring forth life themselves. And then as we shifted into a more agricultural society, the roles of women began to shift also, as well as what was going on thought-wise between men and women. The patriarchy took over because it began to see that women had what they considered to be too much power. Women were making all the determined decisions for the community about the best timing to do everything. That completely goes against a paradigm that wants to promote control, competition, and being able to organize what they want to do linearly rather than organically with what's going on in nature. So there was a combination of things going on. The church at that time, which was run by men, took over the matriarchal spirituality, which was based on women's beliefs of how to coordinate for the best for men and women through coordinating with nature. And the patriarchal church began to say, anything to do with women is no longer holy. Women need to be the consorts of men. Women need to be in the background. They are to be the landowners' wives who bring forth more progeny so that the landowners can own more land. And we're not going to pay any attention to any of this stuff that women have said is necessary. So women's cycles suddenly were swept underground. There used to be a time that was honored by the entire community. The women would go into what they called the moon hut, and they would have their bleeding cycles in that moon hut, and the rest of the community would take care of them while they went there. With this shift in the patriarchal belief system, all of a sudden women became ashamed of having their bleeding cycles because they were viewed by the community as no longer being worth anything. They became less than because they were no longer productive. And all of their productivity was relegated towards having children. So it was a subtle but insidious shift that happened. There's one more thing to add to that, Daniel, and that is during that shift, I might mention that women always based their cycles on the cycles of the moon, and there are 13 cycles of the moon per year, per one revolution of the earth. When the patriarchal culture took over and the calendar was invented, everything was shifted to 12 cycles, not 13. So the 13th cycle was suddenly kicked out, and all of a sudden 13 became an unlucky number because it was considered a women's number. And even today you can get on an elevator and there'll be no 13th floor, or people say Friday the 13th is an unlucky day. That old thought about 13 being unlucky comes from the place where the patriarchy dismissed the matriarchal value of aligning energies with the moon.
Wow, I think about this and I realize that you can actually share, if you could, maybe a practice or two for our listeners that can help them attain better harmony when it comes to their relationships.
I'd love to. There is an entire chapter in my book about harmony in relationships, how to return to the heart. The center of that is learning to listen. I think that's the central, most important thing, is to learn to listen. And you can't really learn to listen if you don't allow space and time to listen. And you have to set aside time in accordance to what your body is telling you to do. So trying to organize time to be quiet and listen can't be based on a Gregorian 7-week calendar where you have a 7-day calendar where you have 5 days you work and then 2 days that you rest, which those 2 days are usually filled in with honeydew errands for men and running to the store or doing the laundry for the women. It's filled in incorrectly. They don't even have the time to rest. So to allow time to listen, you have to listen to the body. For a woman, that means you have a naturally designed cyclical process that every 28 to 31 days, depending on the woman, there's a 5 to 7 day period where you start to bleed and your body says time to slow down, time to stop doing, and time to be, time to listen, time to move inward. It's an organic process that happens naturally for women. But today in modern times, women have just dismissed that and they just plod on because they have to go to work, they have to do the regular jobs. because our society doesn't allow the time for listening. For men, that time for listening comes through recognizing that they're feeling stressed, that they need to take a walk in the woods, that they need to go off on a men's weekend, that they need to do something for themselves, that they need to get quiet and meditate. And they have to listen to their own internal biological cues about when that is. Men have not been afforded that at all. Men are expected to take care of everything and never have a break, just keep it going. So that primary thing about needing a time to listen is important. Based on that, I would say the secondary thing is actually withdrawing during your time to listen. So you have time to listen to what you feel, time to listen to your own thoughts, time to listen to the emotional places where you feel angry or dismissed or grieving something, so that you can find out what's out of balance within yourself and within your life. And then after that time of listening is over, you can go back into your life with a more creative and positive attitude about, okay, that didn't work, now I'm going to try this and do something different. But if you don't allow the time of listening, you can't do anything different. And how that relates specifically to relationships is that relationships get caught and stuck in patterns where a couple may not communicate over a particular issue, or there may be some trigger that causes them to get angry or to separate because they just can't reach harmony over it. And the main thing that's going on is they're not allowing the space to listen to each other's perspective and integrate that into the whole. In my group of women that participated in my study, I interviewed the men at the end of the process and asked them if they felt the study had been valuable and what they found as benefit for them and everything that had been required. And I had one man say to me, I've been married for 17 years, and I love my wife, but only when we did this study did I understand why she has been angry at me for 17 years. Because there was no space for her to tell him, and there was no space for him to listen.
You know, it's funny when you bring that up when it comes to, for instance, the differences between men and women, when you say that he wasn't really listening to her. A lot of times what men tend to do when women express especially something that seems to be a challenge, or to a man it appears to be a problem, we automatically try to find a way to solve it. And in essence, what we're trying to do, I would say, is to alleviate any perceived suffering or pain they may be having. When in fact it seems to me that what women really want is they just want to be heard. Does that make sense?
I think it makes absolute perfect sense, and I think it's a cultural thing. Men get a really bad reputation for not being good listeners when they are trying to be problem solvers. They are trying to take away the pain and the separation. And women are not expressing what they need to because they've lost the power and the ability to be able to express it in a way that they can be heard. So there's something lacking on both sides, and I think it's the space that's necessary for communicating. Men are trained in our culture to fix everything, and part of that comes from the disempowerment of women that happened so long ago, where women were told, you just stay in the kitchen, you just have the babies, we'll take care of everything. That dismissal has carried over where women now feel unheard, not listened to, that nothing that's important to them is important to other people or their partner. And men still feel like, okay, here's a problem, I need to solve it, I need to fix it. That's out of balance and out of harmony. Women can solve their own problems. They just need to be able to communicate about their problems. And men don't need to take the responsibility and the burden of having to fix everything in the world. It's not their responsibility.
I know from time to time in the relationship that I'm in, my wife will come up with an idea, and she will say, so what do you think? And I would just simply say, well, why don't you go with it? Well, what do you think I should do? Well, you came up with the idea. Why don't you go with it? See what happens. And sure enough, over time, she would do this more often than not, and she would actually follow through on the idea and discover new skills that she probably weren't really sure that she even had. And then from time to time, I would say, I've got this idea. Why don't you try this, just out of curiosity. And she would do the same thing. She would go ahead and implement the idea and say, wow, I didn't know that I'd like something like this as much. And then I would discover new things. And so it seemed that between the two of us that what we would begin doing is offering up ideas and saying, okay, how do we feel if we go ahead and pursue this, or is it that important to maybe put it back to the side? And a lot of times what you find is, as you get into that particular practice, is that you really start finding how you can be co-creating together, because you get to see points of view from both sides, and it isn't a matter of being right. It isn't a matter of who's wrong when that situation happens. It's a matter of solving together. And it really, I think, at least in our relationship, has brought a lot of unique harmony because of the fact that we start becoming almost ravenous at times about new ideas and how we can move on them together, and the neat creative processes that occur from the expressions of both sides of the situation. What are your thoughts on something like that as it relates in your book?
Daniel, I think that is a perfect example of exactly what the book is talking about. Being able to encourage a man, being able to encourage the woman, you've got the power and the ability to figure this out. You came up with the idea. I support you. And then when it's appropriate, adding another something to carry it further. I think that is a perfect example of joint partnership and being able to solve things together, or encouraging your partner to be independent and finding something rather than relying upon you. I think it's a perfect example. There's two other things that you mentioned in there, and one of them is you said there doesn't have to be a right and a wrong. My partner and I have a policy that there can always be two rights. There never has to be a right and a wrong. It's just two different perspectives. They're both right. And one perspective may fit a particular circumstance better than another, or perhaps both of them fit and they just need to be joined together. The other thing about relationships that you ask specific examples, this example you have given and what I was talking about being able to listen, one of the key things that relationships lack is respect for one another. Because men stop respecting women and women stop respecting men when the communication stops. And no relationship is going to have harmony if it doesn't have respect.
You know, I can't help but actually want to ask this question here because of the day and age that we're in, and that is when you take a look at it, for instance, this last presidential election cycle, there seemed to be a lot of talk about the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community, LGBT rights. I mean, this seemed to be right up there, right almost at the top of, I guess, our awareness. How does this book here, do you feel, relate to that particular community? Is there a difference, or are we still just talking about natural, biological men and women?
Well, we're not talking only about men and women. The book is about relationships primarily. So that includes relationships with the earth, relationships between men and women, relationships between men, and relationships between women and women. So a person's chosen sexuality doesn't really relate to this book so much. The book reaches out and has things that benefit all partners, all relationships, whether it's you and your grocery clerk, or whether it's a boss at work, or whether it's your intimate partnership. The ability to withdraw within a partnership and say, I need quiet time alone to process my own whatever's going on, to clean and purge whatever toxicity might be present in my system, is necessary for every single human. Even those who aren't in relationship, you're still in relationship with your community, you're still in relationship with the planet, and you still need time to quiet down and listen to your inner voice and listen to whatever guidance comes in. So it's appropriate for all people, no matter what their gender or sexual preference may be.
You know, P, and I couldn't agree with you more. As being someone who's heterosexual, just kind of throwing it out there, you know, in a relationship with a woman, but when you look at those relationships in the homosexual community, there is usually always a masculine and a feminine component. So I could see how this book could relate to that community just as well as any community for that matter.
Yes, absolutely.
Hmm. So what would you say is the most important message that our listeners should take from your book?
To me, the most important message from the entire book is we need to realign with nature. We have become so disaligned from nature, so out of harmony with nature, that we're destroying the planet that supports us. And if we don't start harmonizing our ourselves with the planet, we're going to destroy the planet that's our home. We're doing it by destroying harmony within relationships. We're doing it by destroying harmony within the earth itself. I mean, agriculture overplows fields without giving them a period for rest. That's one example. There's no natural rhythm acknowledged any longer about the earth and what she needs, or about each of us and what we need. And if we want to save the planet, and we want to stop war, and we want to have harmony and peace in our lives, we have to return to a natural cycle. That's not just about a woman's bleeding cycle or a man's vision quest. It's far deeper than that. It's not just about recycling either. This is a far deeper process. This is a really deep look at, okay, why do we have a calendar that's based on 12 months instead of looking at the 13 cycles of the moon? Why do we promote getting that extra dollar from agriculture rather than letting the land lie fallow so it can be more productive in the proper season? We need to really look at the things that we are doing to the planet through unconscious choices that have been part of the norm for so long. They've been part of the norm for so long that we've forgotten to think about them. All we think about now is, oh, there's war and the planet's, getting toxic, and maybe there's too much greenhouse gases, but we don't go to the root of the problem, which is us. We are the root of the problem. We are the ones who have become too much focused on our heads, our thoughts, the mental patterns, the science that lives in the head, and have totally ignored the biological consciousness of who we are as humans and how we are part of Earth.
Last night, as I was considering this segment here with you, Pia, it was a conversation that arose between my wife and I that had something that I think is really relevant to what you're talking about here. And she had brought up that, do you remember that time when, and this is what she was asking me, when up in Washington, northwest Washington, apparently there was a Native American tribe that was granted permission to whale hunt. And she went on to say it. At the time I was kind of foggy, and I said, no, I really don't remember that right offhand, but tell me about what was going on there. She found that it was pretty alarming how once that had happened, how it seemed the national and perhaps even the world consensus is, saying, well, don't you think that's a little ridiculous? I mean, look at the state of whales that they're in today. And then she went on to say, but here was this tribe, and what had happened is that the men would actually purify themselves. So they would abstain from things like sex and whatever else so that they could actually be in harmony with the fact that they were going to go out and do this thing, to go out and hunt a whale. And then she continued on the story to say that what had happened is that a baby whale had basically offered itself up for sacrifice, and then there it was, of course, killed, and then it was celebrated. And then I was reminded of the movie The Whale Rider, which is a story about a young girl who was actually initiated into the chieftain spot, whose sole responsibility of that chief is to sacrifice herself to the ocean, to the whales, because this was a village whose, for lack of a better word, call it their economy and their livelihood was based around the whale itself. And I remember one time when I was describing this to someone, and they were very confused, and I actually found this more than once happen. Well, why does she do that? And I said, well, this is what you need to consider when it comes to symbiosis. So here this young chieftain, which happens to be the chief's daughter, she is honored by being able to ritualistically sacrifice herself into the ocean to the whales. So now what happens is this whale community takes her vital essence and energy and absorbs it so that they can understand this village itself. At the same time, this village now, of course, is relying on being able to capture and have a whale. So now that the whales understand this, they intuitively send out that sacrifice, if you will. And what was funny to me, and I mean funny in an odd way, is the way that our culture would look at a situation like this one of the Northwest Native American tribe granted this permission to do whale hunting. And I said, what's funny is they would be right on the one hand, geez, I thought slaughtering whales was a bad thing. And I said, well, see, now there's the difference. This is one little community hunting one whale. This isn't a big industrial fleet of ships out there rapidly killing thousands of these things. And in some cases, back in the early turn of the century, simply just for the oil to heat lamps and maybe eventually make perfume. This is one village and one whale. There's a big difference, and there's a symbiosis between these two worlds. They're both basically cycling and recycling themselves through this, and it's through those generations they come to understand each other and honor each other. And what's really funny about that, Pia, is how often people scratch their head and they still don't understand what it was I was talking about, no matter how simple I put it.
I understand completely what you're talking about, but I have something else to add into that. I have no judgment for the tribe that needs to do what it needs to do for its survival. Each tribe has to do what is right for their survival. But I have a basic feeling that in order to harmonize ourselves with the planet, we have to eliminate outdated belief systems. And I feel that the tribe has a belief system that they need to do this ritual and they need to have this whale in order to survive, when now they have other things that will promote their being able to feed their tribe that they did not have when the ritual was initiated. So I feel that it's time that we step beyond mindsets of I believe this is the way it needs to be done because this is the way it's always been done. We're stepping here away from tribal rights, which may be considered human rights or whale rights. We need to step into a parameter of rights for all of life. All life has a right, and it is a belief system to believe that the whale sacrifices itself. I don't feel the baby whale, is going to come up and sacrifice itself if the men weren't out there ready to kill it. They change their mindset to say this whale has offered itself because they have followed their ritual. They have followed what they believe is right to do in a holy way, which I have no judgment on. I'm just saying that it might be worthy of listening and considering that perhaps they don't have to do it that way any longer. Perhaps as a community of all living beings, we've reached the point in our evolutionary status where we need to say all life is sacred, and how can I support myself, my family, and my tribe without taking another life, because all life has consciousness. And then if a whale washes up on the shore, it's going to wash up on the shore because it understands synchronistically, as you've already explained, the tribe's made a mindset change. They've shifted. That's
right.
My perspective.
And that makes perfect sense. I like when you talk about how people sometimes will hold on to what you would say outdated or the idea that this is the way it's always been done. I remember when we first started producing our show that we would hear things like that. Well, this is the way it's always been done. And that was back in the day when we were on terrestrial radio. But I knew inherently things are going to change here, and you seem unwilling to change with these things. And that this was a particular industry that was looking at itself and its proud idea that it's been around for almost 100 years doing things this way successfully. And I'm thinking, but you don't see the change. And I get this probably a little bit better than you do now. And so I started moving the other direction, trying to anticipate this. And sure enough, now you watch, these radio stations, if you will, a lot of them scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next. And that's one inevitable fact about nature, natural cycles, is the fact that there will always be change. And
Absolutely.
I think that when you pay attention to what you're talking about, what you share about in your book, is that as you can follow the rhythm, the natural rhythm and these natural cycles, you will, I think, begin to instinctively anticipate those changes in a way that will almost make you seem to be like intuitive or psychic, if you will. Would that make sense?
It makes absolutely perfect sense. I think one other way of saying it is that holding on to a tradition and having pride in the tradition actually belies the process of change. And change is what life is all about. Holding on to a tradition can keep us locked into an old paradigm that actually prevents our evolution.
Absolutely. I remember there was a company, it was a restaurant we were working with, And we had an idea that was pretty simple for them to bring customers in that really was almost at ridiculously zero cost. And so what had happened was we decided to present the idea. We were already doing it, but we decided to present the idea to the person who was in charge of their marketing and advertising, which happened to be the owner's daughter. And this was the response that we got. Well, we've been doing it this way. It's the way it's always been done, and so we're going to stick with what we know. Okay, I think you're really missing the point, but you go ahead and you do what you're going to do instead of, kind of maybe test running this a little bit, which was really successful because it was also in that relationship where we won on both sides. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to continue what they were doing, and it wasn't even 2 years later, not even 2 years later, the company had to file for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I knew it was because of all the money they were spending in advertising. And I was saying, do you realize that you could eliminate a lot of that with this one idea here? Not all of it, but a lot of it. And it's very cost effective, but they're just unwilling to change. Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes what's going to happen if you're unwilling to do that.
Yes.
So now tell us, Pia, how people can find out about your book. Now, I understand it hasn't been released yet. We're in August, but it's supposed to be in September of 2017?
Yes, September the 12th of this year.
Okay, great.
You can look a couple of places to find the book. You can find it on Inner Traditions' website, or you can look at my website, which is Pia Orlean, and that's spelled Orleane. Pia is P-I-A. PiaOrlean.com. There is a list of links where you can pre-order the book on my website, and you can find it there. And I hope that you'll be intrigued and will like to read this book and share it, because I'm truly putting my heart into saving our planet and helping us get along more easily and better.
Absolutely. Pia, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for such an excellent interview.
Thank you. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Also, be sure to integrate into your natural rhythms by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter and stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming programs. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.